Hi everyone, I'm Sharmishtha Chowdhury, and I am your author this evening. Thank you so much to Ramin Ganeshram, the Executive Director of the Westport Museum for History and Culture, and to Nicole Carpenter, who is the Programs Director at the Westport Museum. So thank you for joining. And I am going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll also do two quick readings from my novel. So I am a historian, and I am also a novelist, and I teach at Queen's College, CUNY, and I basically, straddle two slightly different genres of writing. One is creative writing, and one is scholarly academic writing, and I enjoy both a lot. So, my first novel, The Communist Cookbook, which I'm going to show you right here, this was published by Penguin India in 2013, and my scholarly book on the First World War was published in 2019 by Routledge, and I'm working on a couple more a couple more books. One is another historical novel set in India during 1947 during the partition, and I'm also working on another scholarly book. So I've got a couple of different things going on right now. So I would like to tell you a little bit about how I approached this novel, The Communist Cookbook. As you can see, it's a novel, and my editor had to give it the subtitle, a novel, because every time he said he was working on the communist cookbook, people wanted to know, well, what are the recipes? And as you can imagine, since it's a novel, there's not a whole lot of recipes, and I can't. I'm sort of trying to imagine what sort of recipes a communist cookbook would have. But it's set in British India. It's set in this very tense period between the end of the Second World War and just before Indian independence in 1947. So it's kind of set in this twilight zone where there's a lot of tensions. There's a lot of political tensions. The British haven't yet left, but the war is over, and partition of South Asia into India, Pakistan. That's still going to happen. That's still in the future, and it's really. I thought it was a really ideal way to explore kind of the fluidity, the tensions, the economic crisis, and the war itself. And in a strange sort of a way, it seems uh, pretty relevant now because we are again in a state of great crisis and tension. And of course, the book is about a cookbook, but the cookbook is a sort of a loose frame of reference to bring together a diverse set of characters. Now, the Second World War, for just to give you a brief overview, well, officially it started in 1939 and ends in 1945. In British India, what happened was that the war was declared on behalf of India without consulting the elected provincial governments, and so essentially it led India into a crisis because it was a kind of again a sort of a reassertion of imperial authority at that time. So there was a burgeoning resistance movement, both nonviolent as well as militant, more sort of an armed uprising. And one of the things that my novel tries to introduce to the reader is the situation where you have adjacent to each other, you have both the old princely India, the India of semi-autonomous or sometimes more fully autonomous princely states, adjacent to territories that were ruled or governed directly by the British. And so my novel talks about a young British officer who is trying to see out the end of the Second World War in this situation, and he gets drawn into local politics. I also try to bring in the beginnings of the Cold War through the characters of two Americans who are also stuck in this town, this fictional cantonment town, or military town as they would be called. And I sort of, through these characters, I try to explore all these tensions. And it was great researching it. There's a lot of material, obviously. There's a lot of material that I had to go out and find as well. So I thought what I would do is I would read uh, two extracts from my novel, and I will, and one of this is about, about a young, the young officer, George Clark, and his sort of interaction with this caretaker in a fort, and the caretaker's story of his experience of the war. And the second extract, I'll talk about this young American photographer, Anna, who is also stuck in India for the duration of the war, and her experiences in this little town that she first finds herself in, and what she sees and what she observes at that time. So here we go, and I'm going to read you the first extract, which is about Ramu, the chowkidar, or the caretaker of a fort. Ramu Chowkidar was the caretaker of Abdul Khan's tomb, employed by the government at the wage of 20 rupees a month, a wage that he had to accept to retain his government job. And how did their precarious state come to pass here in Mao? Well, 10 years ago, when Ramu had been young and strong, his wife Indumati had sent him from their native land in Kolhapur in western India to find work in Indore in central India. This move had also put an end to Ramu's hobby in Kolhapur of growing different kinds of herbs that he then gave to ailing friends and neighbors. Indumati, his wife, had always liked the smell of the herbs her husband grew. The smooth paste that he made always cured her headaches brought on by the smoky kitchen with its belching wood stoves. Indumati's cooking was renowned in her village near Kolhapur, and her services were often enlisted during weddings. She routinely turned out samosas, barfi, and petha for 200 people at a time. She got little or no money for her efforts, though, as all this was the normal quid pro quo services of rural life. But now off they went, parents and two sons, to Indore, where Ramu Chowkidar found a better paying job as one of the three watchmen in the old fort of Ahirabad. European tourists often came to look at the majesty of the fort and to marvel at the tale of Shivaji's exploits. It was here that Shivaji, the most famous rebel against the Mughals, had come to defend the fort against Delhi and had supported his armies through the collection of taxes from the villagers. The warrior king had lived in Ahirabad for 2 years, to the intense anger of the local ruler, Raja Veer Singh, who was overshadowed by his more charismatic rival. One morning, as mysteriously as he had arrived, Shivaji disappeared, taking his fighting men and leaving the fort open to the Mughal army that quickly reclaimed the lands for the Mughal state. Veer Singh paid the price for defying the march of time. He was replaced by a Peshwa ruler who, in turn, gave way with ill grace to the encroaching British East India Company with their new armies and strange new laws of succession that did not recognize the rights of adopted children. Ramu and Indumati spent peaceful years in Ahirabad. They knew nothing about Veer Singh or the East India Company. All they knew was that it was Ramu's job to keep the fort clear of trespassers and squatters and to close up the place at night. In return, Ramu got 30 rupees a month and was allowed to pitch a small hut near one of the western walls of the fort at the crumbling ruins of the former pavilion. Ramu's and especially Indumati's lack of appreciation of the history of the place would be their undoing. Indumati once told a European visitor, a scholar of Sanskrit and Persian, in fact, who had come up to speak to this charming example of Indian peasant womanhood, that she did not know anything about Aurangzeb or Veer Singh or the Mughals. But This fort wasn't much use to anyone now, was it? And look what happened to all those kings and other powerful men, all dead and gone to heaven or hell or other lives. Could those men do anything now to stop her, Indumati, from lighting her wood stove in full view of their grand royal quarters? And now, if the gentleman would allow her, could she carry on with the lighting of the stove? She stalked off, grumbling at the disruption to her routine. The scholar was deeply shocked at her complete indifference. May I say total contempt for this unique historical place? As he wrote a 3 page letter of complaint to the chief archaeologist of Indore, expressing his sentiment of absolute outrage. His mood was not lightened when the following day in the Indore bazaar he heard a passing herd of British soldiers complaining about their route march to that heap of old stones. Hurrying away to Agra the next day, he soothed his offended sensibilities by taking in the wonders of the Taj Mahal by moonlight. His letter did not go unacknowledged, though. In fact, a few days after receiving it, Ramu's supervisor suspended him from his duties. The order was promptly put on hold, however, because at the same time, a large number of white people were jailed in Ahirabad, and Ramu became part of the manpower required to look after them while making sure that they did not escape. George raised an eyebrow at Roy. It was the Germans, Roy explained. A lot of German civilians were locked up in Ahirabad when the war broke out. Although most of the German POWs were taken to the Purandar fort near Pune. For 5 years, Ramu and other chowkidars guarded the inner precincts of Ahirabad fort, while more serious looking uniformed men patrolled the outer perimeter. Indumati earned some extra money by washing the clothes of the internees. All in all, the arrangement was quite pleasant for everyone. The prisoners were all men. The Mem Sahibs were either allowed to go away or imprisoned somewhere else. Ramu did not know. Among these interned Sahibs was Karl, who often tried to talk to Ramu and the other chowkidars. He would even pay them small amounts of cash to help him with his beautiful garden just behind the communal barracks. There, in the dry winter months, Ramu helped Karl coax beautiful plants whose names he did not know out of the black volcanic soil. Here and there, Ramu planted mint and tulsi, which delighted Karl. The tall German brought out small bags of seeds and two great books to show Ramu when the guards were not in sight. One day during the monsoons, Karl fell very ill, as people do during that season. The camp doctor prescribed some pills, and Indumati cooked him light meals. Solemn faced, the internees gathered around Karl and whispered in low tones. Some of them even spoke harshly to Ramu, as if he had ordered them to be locked up, he grumbled to Indumati. On the seventh day, when Karl's fever was still raging, he called Ramu to his bedside in a hoarse tone. Then Karl had Ramu half drag him, half carry him to the garden. The Deccan air, usually so dry and clean, now smelt wet and heavy with rain, and the thick soil had turned green, the only time of the year when the craggy plateau's jagged edges were softened with luminous color. With unsteady shaking hands, Karl picked some herbs and gave them to Ramu, indicating to him in sign language that he was to wash them and mix them in a drink for Karl. But Ramu knew that Karl had missed an important ingredient. For a racking cough like this, one had also to add tulsi, or holy basil. He took some tulsi leaves off a plant and showed them to Karl. Karl looked doubtful. But by then he was exhausted with his effort of walking outside and made no objection when Ramu brought back his half Indian, half European herbal drink. After 2 days of drinking this potion, Karl still had a fever, but he knew now that he would survive. The ache in his joints had lessened somewhat, and his throat was no longer as closed and inflamed as it had been. Within a week, he recovered almost completely and was walking short distances. Since Karl was not permitted to go to Ramu's hut and see his herb garden, Ramu would bring him from time to time some herbs to see and to smell. The German would examine them and then write notes in his journal. Ramu and Karl's joint venture fell apart when the German civilians were either let go or relocated. On a still, warm October On a still warm October morning in 1944, Ramu found to his surprise that there was a bustle of khaki clad soldiers. He saw Carl talking to a British officer who had a list in his hand. "Do you have any clothes for that sahib?" he asked the dhobi who had just arrived with the dismal news that all the prisoner sahibs were leaving, but he did not know where. "Yes, there are these shirts and half pants." Ramu took them over to Karl, whose pale blue eyes lit up momentarily in a smile. He asked the British officer if he could take Ramu outside. The officer looked at his watch impatiently and told him to be back soon. He gestured, and a British soldier strolled nonchalantly after Ramu and Karl, keeping one hand on his rifle just in case. Outside, the pre dawn sky had just turned a light pink. In the herb garden, there were small sparrows and cocky, aggressive miners who fluttered away as the two men approached. There, in German and sign language, Karl told Ramu that the plot was now his. Alles ist deine. They stood together, looking at the waving plants, a small, thin Maratha peasant and a tall, blond Bavarian, neither smiling. There were no farewell gestures between them, just an unspoken acknowledgement of parting, worlds separating after a brief union, never to meet again. So that was the first extract. And since I'm running short of time here, I was told to keep it to about 15 minutes. I'm just going to quickly read you a second extract, and then you can send me questions, and I can certainly take any questions you have. So this extract is really about Anna, who is the young American photographer from the Midwest who is stranded by the war in a small town in eastern India called Jamshedpur. And she goes from Bombay, she goes travels by train to the east to Jamshedpur. And this is Anna recalling her experience. My editor's friends, the Raymonds, lived in a wonderful apartment in Bombay that looked over the sea. Most of the rest of the building had been requisitioned for war purposes, but the Raymonds were allowed to stay. It was good to eat mashed potatoes and gravy again after that bilge we got on the ship. Paula even came with me to Jamshedpur. She said that she had to go to Calcutta anyway, so it wasn't out of the way for her. But really, it was. She was just trying to be good to me. And to be honest, I was happy to have a chaperone. The trains, the stations, everything was so different and almost threatening. If a mob had decided to attack me, I had no language in which to tell them that I was American and not British. Not that that would have changed the minds of a bunch of rioters, I suppose. We got off at the Tatanagar railway station in the evening. I must say I loved Jamshedpur right away. First, there was that glow, red golden in the distance, like a fierce sun below the horizon. John, Mary Louise's husband, told me it was the pouring of the smelted iron at the foundry. It could be seen for miles around. Jamshedpur was full of people, but there was a serenity about it that was a refreshing change from Bombay. I would soon discover how shallow that serenity was in only a few weeks. Mary Louise lived in a pretty little bungalow full of mango trees and flowering bushes. It's strange that I barely remember the house, although I remember the although I remember the people so well. But I do recall that it was a nice little brick place with a tiled roof and a couple of chimneys for the fireplaces. Mary Louise's husband would light fires every evening. Blooming hot, he would bellow at me, being a little short of conversation with women. But a nice man, perfect for little Mary Louise with all her fusses over tablecloths and brownies and cookies. And the servants. I had never been in a house with so many servants. Mary Louise herself was bewildered that she had to supervise so many people in one medium sized household. And it was a good thing that Paula came with me because she was able to give Mary Louise quite a few tips about things like that. Jamshedpur was beautiful in those days. It was mid November, the nights were cool and comfortable, and Mary Louise's servants served up large hot mugs of coffee every day. Oh, I feel nostalgic for home every time I remember those mugs of coffee, rich and dark and creamy. I was so tired of the watery soup like thing they served up everywhere east of France. Mary Louise had people traveling from the States bring over stocks of coffee beans for her. On one vacation home, she had had several barrels shipped back with her. I've got enough coffee to last me for 2 years here, she had laughed. God forbid, if I can't go home for any reason, I can at least drink my 3 cups of good American coffee a day. I can't stand the stuff they sell in the stores in Calcutta. Poor Mary Louise. Little did she know that in a few weeks, dealing with shortages would be her reality. But in the last few days before America entered the war, Jamshedpur seemed a wonderful retreat from real life. Mary Louise and I spent some enjoyable days visiting other American ladies, going to concerts, and some rather awful theater. One day, Mary Louise had about 20 local women over for lunch to meet me. The British women were worried about the war. Tensions were building up in the Far East. And some of the British women had formed committees to discuss what to do if the Indians attacked them. I saw this as a great chance to continue my work. I was planning to leave India the second week of December, and I hoped to get some pictures of these women and their meetings. Anyway, Jemima Owens, the organizer of the committee, was quite happy to have me attend. In fact, she was thrilled that her little gang of gals was going to be in the papers, even if it was a sorry little paper like the Minneapolis Newsday. They met at the Owens' bungalow every other evening, a worried, rather grey faced group of women who chatted incessantly about servants and local scandals as they waited for the meeting to come to order. I took photographs of them in this mood. I'll show them to you someday. The horizon of worries spread far and wide for these women. Wizened Veronica Colby, wife of one of the senior engineers, dwelt on her pet theme, the problems of thieving servants. Sheila French, very religious, was obsessed with the philandering ways of the large numbers of single men in town, none of whom, it appeared, wanted to philander with any of her 5 daughters. But the whole point of the meeting, as Jemima Owens reminded us when she finally set the meeting on its true agenda, was the problem with the Indians. The war had raised political tensions sky high, and the worry was that the steel workers in Jamshedpur would strike. The steel produced in Jamshedpur was used in the critical munitions industries, so keeping the political temperature down was crucial to the authorities. There was an underlying tension in Jamshedpur, which I, a happy, heedless tourist, had only too willingly ignored in my first few days in town. But here at the meeting, the ugliness that lay under all the orderliness came into full light. So I'll stop here now, but I'm happy to take questions. So I see that Sarah says that we need that potion in large supply now, which I'm guessing is you're talking about the herbal potion that Ramu, the caretaker of the fort, created for Carl. And you're right. Really wish we could have a potion that would take care of all of us right now. So yeah, I hear you. I would love a potion like that too. So I don't know if oh, so Sarah wants to know, how did you research for this book? Good question, Sarah. So I actually was researching for the book as well at the same time that I was researching for my scholarly book as well. So it was in a lot of different archives. I used the archives in India. I used the British Library. I also looked at a lot of sort of internal military records, and I looked also at the basically at people's memoirs. I read a lot of literature from the period, so a bunch of different things. And I also actually did a lot of my work at the Westport Library. So I am actually very grateful to the Westport Library too, because a lot of my both my books were written in those two places. So, any other questions? Sorry, I'm going to. I've done something to my chat window and it is now covering my camera for some reason. Okay, so I'm basically going to just, end here if nobody else has any questions. But it was really nice to talk to all of you. And, if you, so Sarah wants to know where is the best place to purchase. Sarah, the book is available on Amazon, and it is it's also available on Kindle, so you can download it as a Kindle if you don't want to get the paperback. Cheryl wants to know how long does it take to research your books. Cheryl, this both my books actually take a while because I'm also a trained historian, so I kind of really like to go into the archives and look for a lot of material. So I actually it took me about almost 3 years from start to finish for each of the books. And I'm working on a second historical novel now, which is going to be set in British India in 1947. And it sort of looks at really at a regiment being divided between India and Pakistan. And so that's actually very interesting too, but it's taking me a while because I do a lot of archival research as well to kind of recreate both the setting, but also trying to create characters who are believable in that particular time period. But it's all very enjoyable. I mean, I really like the researching as well as the writing. And I had a very good luck with my both my editors for both the books. So they made me actually take out a lot of things. I mean, I wanted to see it. I sort of had a very sprawling manuscript because I was trying to do a look at lives in parallel, but in different parts of the world in during the Second World War. So India, the United States, the United Kingdom. So there was one portion where I actually wanted to. I'd created these two other characters. Basically, one was George, the young officer, features a lot in this novel. His girlfriend in England, who's a cook, and I really wanted to actually follow her life also because food shortages were and food played such an important role in the war, and food shortages were so much a part of everyone's life the whole world over, and strangely enough it's become part of our lives too at this time. So I actually wanted to do like these parallel lives in different places, but my editor very wisely suggested that I focus on tone down some of those characters and maybe feature them in another book. So I had to actually pare down the place that I'd given to Alice the cook, and also to the caretaker, to Ramu. And I had to actually develop. I kept actually the space that I'd created for his wife, Indumati, who plays actually quite she plays a sort of a good role in this book as the cook, and there's another English woman who's called Deborah, who also has her friends create this portfolio. So that's of pictures and recipes, and that's what's called the Communist Cookbook. So yeah, there's a lot of food. There's not a lot of recipes, though. I can't promise that you'll find a lot of recipes, but there's a lot of description of food and the different kinds of food that people ate at the time. Okay, in case somebody's typing, I'm just waiting to see if anybody else is typing. But if not, I mean, I think my 30 minutes are kind of getting up now. But I'm happy to, answer any questions. You can reach out to me through the Westport Museum. You're very welcome, Sarah. You're very welcome. All of you are very welcome, and it's wonderful to talk, to everybody through this live stream. I wish I could do this in person, but maybe that'll be another day. I actually did do a book talk on this at the Westport Museum a couple of years ago. But, maybe the next book, hopefully, we will get through this war as well, and we'll be back to doing something, resembling our previous lives. Okay, well, take care, everyone. Bye bye. Stay well, stay safe, stay healthy.